So that I name got the name right. Hello, Ella. It's good to see you. How are you doing?
Good, Christian. Thanks for having me on your podcast. I'm looking forward to our conversation today.
Thank you for your time. Thank you for your time. Uh, we are live on LinkedIn today. I hope you enjoy it. And my first question to you is from where are you calling today?
I'm currently in Tampa, Florida.
Oh,
So it's always very sunny here, although these few days it's been very cloudy and there's like a big tropical storm coming through for the 4th of July weekend. So not ideal, but it's okay. We can take a break from the sun.
the 4th of July weekend is tomorrow, isn't it?
Yeah,
Is
it
that
is.
tomorrow?
It is.
What's going on in Florida on the 4th of July?
Well, normally, a lot of beach time, boating, barbecue. So I have a friend coming to visit, so it'll be nice, but it's usually the plans. Fireworks on the beach.
Oh,
Something to look forward to as well.
that's beautiful. That's beautiful. Except the storm. But usually it's sunny weather, isn't it? Florida at this time of the year.
The Sunshine State, yeah, normally.
The Sunshine State. Yeah, it's well known for that. Um, Let me ask you the next question. I know that many people, especially on LinkedIn, when they come across a live stream, are in a hurry. They have a lot of meetings. And let's assume that the farm executives listens or starts listening to the live stream. What's the most important message that you would want to give to them if they just leave in the next 5 minutes?
I want pharma biotech executives to hear and know that the patient journey is crucial to their success as a company and as um, and creating profit um, for their business, and also there's value in partnership with the patient communities that they are seeking to create better solutions and better treatments for.
I totally agree. For many biotech executives, the patient is the unknown figure, the unknown variable. What should make them come back? What are the free messages that they will find in our live stream, in our recording today, that gives them a reason to come back and listen to the full live stream?
I will share my story, and not that it's necessarily the most compelling or inspiring, but I think it gives perspective on how someone with a rare disease has shaped their life, and it's created a passion for um, building collaboration and building unity between patients, between industry, to create better solutions and better health, better outcomes for other patients. So not just that I can share this journey um, in hope of creating momentum and seeing change in the future, but also I think the perspective that I've gained along the way of understanding um, what truly is the needs, what are the needs of the companies, and what are the needs of the patients, and how can we together work towards better solutions. So I hope to address some of those points in our conversation.
I'm looking forward to it. It's exciting. It's exciting. Let's start with the term that I read at Bio International when I found your profile, patient advocacy. What does it mean to you?
It's a I think it's a very complex but simple um, term. I think that truly at its core, patient advocacy creating, is sharing a vision, sharing a passion to create momentum for change in the realm of health, as a person living with a condition or having an experience and wanting to create improvement and change in the whole ecosystem for not just themselves, but for others like them who either live with their condition or are just part of the patient population. So advocacy is raising your voice, and not just the voice, but having ideas for improvements and change and seeing that through and being a part of it, catalyzing that and being part of it.
You have your own experience with being a patient in the system. Would you like to talk about it?
Yeah, I would be happy to.
Yeah. How do you perceive the healthcare system from the patient perspective?
How do I perceive the what? Sorry,
How do you perceive the healthcare
their
system from the
system.
patient perspective?
Well, I think, I mean, obviously there is some nuance to that. It very much depends on, the perspective that one might have as far as whether they were, diagnosed early as a patient or whether they're a patient, in the later part of their life, and it really shapes the experience. But, I am somebody that was diagnosed with a disease very early on at 18 months old. So I've only known having this disease. And I think in some ways that's made it a little bit easier, actually, than if somebody were to have a, cataclysmic change and disruption, to their life and having the onset of a disease, later in life and having to really modify and adjust their lives to such a degree and such a magnitude. But having always had this condition, being born with it, and though it's made things very challenging, I've always had the perspective that I know what I need to do every day to try to stay healthy, to try to get better, to advocate for myself, to create the life that I want to live. And it's like one building block at a time, and one, sometimes it is one step forward and two steps back, but it's always that movement forward and knowing where it is that I want to end up. And this, I know this is kind of very abstract, but uh, I think that at its core, people, patients, people or people just want to live the best quality of life as they possibly can. And so there are many factors involved in that. There are factors of their physical health, their mental health, their their social, surroundings, their families, their work, their job, where they live. And so all of these factors contribute to their overall well-being. And so in as many ways as possible, or to the best degree as possible, gaining or as a patient, having that support to live the best quality of life that one can, given their health and situational circumstances. That is ultimately the goal, and how, what I think should be a focus of healthcare is making this as much of a reality as much possible for every single person.
You mentioned that enabling patients to live, or humans to live the best quality of life possible to them should be a goal. But how is the healthcare system today? Is it really a goal in the healthcare system?
I want to believe that as humans, our goal is to help one another. Our goal is to advance medicine, advance treatments, advance health. I mean, we are seeing that, right? I mean, as a society, we move forward. We are not stagnant. And so, although there are, you know, factors with, capitalism and commercialization and the monetary side of this type of investments into creating drugs and moving healthcare forward, and the reimbursement model that hospitals get for treating patients, but that's just because doctors need money to live as well. So
Mm.
I think that I yes, there is I am overall, I am optimistic and hopeful, and I know that health as a whole, our goal hierarchically is, creating better lives for people, But when you really like bury down into it, there's a lot of factors that contribute to that stagnation and why sometimes it feels like, you know, patients and people, with conditions die every day from rare diseases and from cancers that we haven't found treatments for. And so that can feel very, um, it can be saddening and it can feel like we're not making the advancements that we should be. But yeah, we can delve more into that, but I would say that's just what I think as a
No,
whole.
absolutely, we should dive into that and not be too much worried about conspiracy theories. But it's tempting. It's tempting. I totally agree to what you say. When we talk about money, you mentioned the monetary side. You can always twist it towards being something evil or being something not really good for humanity or greedy or just wanting to make money. But as you
Right,
mentioned, doctors have to live, researchers have to live, and they need money to research the next big thing.
right.
Overall, I think when I look at the healthcare system, overall, I think in the last 100 years, the pharma industry has done a tremendous good job globally. Life expectancy 100 years ago, 150 years ago, especially in the United States. I read a book about the Wild West in Texas, how it really was. The life expectancy was across the board, I think, for humanity, 30 years. And that's it. And now in the West, you're at 80 years. So this
Mhm.
is, I think, a huge advancement in the healthcare system. But coming back to your point that you were diagnosed with a disease at 18 months old, what was your early experience in healthcare?
A lot of my memories are sitting in the hospital beds. As far as getting treatment for this condition. So, um, to share a little bit more, cystic fibrosis is a rare genetic, primarily lung disease, and it causes a buildup of thick mucus in the lungs. And over time, this cycle of infection, from bacteria that are attracted from the air we breathe in into the lungs, and the cycle of infection and inflammation leads to lung deterioration and lung damage. And so to treat these infections, I've had to receive countless courses of antibiotics to reduce the bacterial load of the bacteria in the lungs, and then to sort of stall that cycle of disease progression in the lungs. And so, many times in my childhood, I've had just memories of being stuck in the hospital room for 2 to 3 weeks at a time, getting intravenous antibiotics. And, um, there was a number of other children in there who had CF, who had leukemia, many other conditions too. And a lot of times it was sort of like the woe me, like, oh, it's how unfortunate that this is the life that I had, been dealt. Um, but as I sort of got older and started to understand, not just accept the disease and my life and the condition, but to see it in a positive light. And so that's where, I started to not be so afraid of, okay, I wouldn't be like, oh my gosh, staying in the hospital is the end of the world. And my life comes to a halt. I'm not able to go to school. I'm not able to spend time with my friends. But obviously, as I, got older, I sort of started to channel that more into, well, yes, this is my circumstance now, but what can I still do to, stay happy or to move my life forward or to make an impact in some way. And so that's where I started to, and not to get ahead of ourselves, but that's when I started to realize that my experience, and sort of the learnings from my own healthcare encounters can support and impact other people who are going through similar circumstances and situations. And and others can learn from what I've learned and the way that I, started to be able to communicate my own needs with hospital staff, with the clinical staff, and understanding as I gained more understanding about my disease and about my body and my health, I became more of this partner in my own care. And so that was really, the catalyst for me to get into the really the work and the life truly that I live now. That was what it stemmed from.
This is extremely impressive when I compare your story, what you said, to what I experience also here in Austria. I mean, many people would just give up and say, okay, I mean, this is life and it's not good, and get angry, get mad, get sad, or start drinking, um, trying drugs, and you turned it into something positive for humanity. How did you find the strength?
You know, I think it's a couple of things. I think it's first a desire and a will to live, as at a very fundamental, basic level, and doing whatever it takes to be able to do that. I also think it takes a lot of truly just mental reality checks, and being very grounded in the reality of what is, and not allowing our minds to conjure stories and take us to places in our minds that can really be detrimental, both to our physical and mental health. And I think being able to channel that and being able to find that strength in the reality, and then making appropriate decisions and actions based on that, um, I think is the way by which I've been able to do that. And in general, I think always seeing like the glass half full. I think that you have to have that seed of positivity to um, be able to stay grounded and see sort of a broader picture.
Yeah, I totally agree. I like this the glass half full analogy, but then I saw a movie with Woody Allen. I think it was Scoop, 2006 movie, where he also brought this analogy, Woody Allen style. So
Yeah.
you should watch the movie. It's
Uh,
a good laugh. It's a good
okay, I
laugh.
will. I'm
Yeah.
not a big movie buff, so there's so many movie references that people have told me, and I'm just like, no, I don't know that one.
This one is worth it. This one is worth it. Look into it. They have just Google it. I mean, I'm sure these days you find it easily on YouTube with
Yeah.
Woody Allen, Scoop, half glass full, half empty.
Okay.
It's,
Oh.
it's for
Oh.
me, at least for me, it was a good laugh. But what I really find impressive is your mindset. And maybe I ask a little bit deeper into that direction. You said that you don't allow yourself to get into these dark places in your own mind where it's pointing toward a not so good road.
Right.
How do you do that? How do you get out of it? I think many people could benefit from such a mind trick or having a tool in their toolbox to understand when does such a bad phase start and how can I push myself out of it?
Hmm. I am not saying that I have never had those bad moments, and nor am I saying that I will never have them again, because certainly they happen. Um, I think I think, and maybe it's again that half glass full is like seeing, okay, this is what's really bad, but these are also the things that are good. So, when I was young, I have a recollection of a moment where it was a time that I was going into the hospital, and I had had a doctor's appointment the day before, or that day, earlier that day, and my lung function was down. I was, having an infection, losing weight, just not functioning. My body was weakened, and so the doctor's like, "Oh, you need to go in the hospital. We need some antibiotics. We need to tune you up," as they call it. And so, I had gone home, packed up all my bags, like it's like you're moving into the hospital, and was walking into the hospital with my mom. And there, I was just sad. I was complaining, I was like, this is why, why do I have to deal with this when I'm trying my hardest? I'm trying to stay healthy. Why is this happening? And walking out of the hospital was a woman who was pushing a wheelchair with a little girl sitting in the wheelchair, and she had no hair. So she had obviously cancer, leukemia, or some form. And, you know, my mom just said, like, okay, well, would you rather be her? And I know that obviously it's like trading one horrible thing for another. But my life, at least then, was not terminal. And I think that, cancer you can recover, but the chances are much lower. And so as much as like tough love, that as much of a tough love moment as that was, it's it was impactful because I think that it makes me think about, well, see the good, right? It's like, okay, these are all the things that are bad, but these are the few things that I know that are still good and that I can hold on to. And so that's what's kept, I think that's the mindset that keeps us going.
Yeah, this is excellent. It reminds me also of a conversation on the podcast with Susanne Haywood. She's now, I think, COO at Exor. It's a holding company here in Europe. I would say the Berkshire Hathaway of Europe. And when she was a child, she almost died on a sailing boat. And what she said is something similar that you said, put things into proportion. She also asked her, what kept you going back then? And she said, put things into
Mhm.
proportion. This is what I learned back then.
Yeah.
And it's really useful still now in her role to just say, okay, when things are bad, they could be even worse.
Right, right. Exactly.
That's a very good notion. You mentioned that you tried a lot of treatments in the hospital. Can we dive a little bit deeper into that? Which treatments do kids usually get in such a phase?
So as I said, at least when I was a child, the only treatments for cystic fibrosis were antibiotics to treat these infections. And then obviously maintenance treatments to clear the lungs of this mucus. So that is like those are daily treatments that I do even today, every day, multiple times a day. Bronchodilators to open the airways, hypertonic saline, which is just salt water to kind of liquefy the secretions, and then some really just manual therapy to just try to excrete or cough out the mucus from the lungs. So those are the kind of treatments that I do every day. CF also affects the pancreas actually, and requires the pancreas produces digestive enzymes when the food that we eat helps to break down food. And so in CF, the pancreas isn't able to the enzymes that the pancreas creates aren't able to get into the stomach when we're eating food to digest. And so replacement enzyme therapy is something that I have to take as well. So these are just pills. And and then, as I said, it has really only been these treatments using antibiotics to treat the infections. And so it's really, CF is a progressive disease. It is a life-shortening disease. And in the last, um, in the last number of years, there have been some advancements made to treat the underlying cause of the disease. And so this is fixing the protein channel that isn't allowing the proper water and salt in and out of the cells which is what creates that habitat in the lungs where this thick mucus and bacteria can fester. And so there's a number of years ago, I guess it's been the medication that I'm on now has been 6 years that was approved. But prior to that, there were previous versions that treated different mutations of CF that are treating the underlying problem. And so it's been reducing the severity of these infections and sort of overall improving quality of life. So that's been some incredible advances for the treatment of CF. But, to go back to growing up, I mean, really until my, mid to late 20s, that was the plan, was just to use antibiotics and, try to be as active as possible to move air in and out of the lungs to keep them healthy. Um, and you know, and that's pretty much it.
Are antibiotics still important as a treatment today?
In general, like
Mm,
for
mm,
cystic fibrosis.
mm.
Um, yes, without antibiotics, there really aren't any other effective therapeutics, or at least approved on the market therapeutics to treat infections. I mean, antibiotics are what we use to kill bacteria. And, we can maybe get into this a little bit, but
Mm.
I think there's, no real novel approaches to treating infections other than antibiotics. And so, in my over time, these infections create a resistance to antibiotics, and that is a real and urgent problem. And so that is a problem at the forefront for people with CF, that this chronic use of antibiotics has caused significant antibiotic resistance in the bacteria that thrive in the lungs and these chronic infections that you cannot eradicate. And so, over time, the antibiotics that I had used and have used for treating these infections have become less effective. And so, having to, use longer courses, longer duration of courses of treatment, and they've, yeah, just lost their effectiveness. And so I've had periods of time where I have had an infection that was not responding to antibiotics at all.
S-
Yeah,
So, mm.
go ahead.
So it's basically treating, so humans with conditions similar to yours have basically antibiotics to treat the symptoms, but there is no cure of the underlying root cause invented yet that really works. Is that the right understanding of the situation for patients?
There is no cure for CF now. So there's these treatments that are, kind of, well, antibiotics obviously are alleviating the symptoms of the congestion and the mucus. The other therapies that have been developed in the last number of years, called modulator therapies, they are at a cellular level treating um, the the underlying cause and reducing the severity of the mucus that builds up in the lungs. But on a genetic level, there is no cure. And the cells that are produced in the body exhibit this protein problem um, continuously. And so we are working towards, obviously, there is a lot of advancements in gene therapy, and I'm very hopeful for that future. But as of today, these medications, while modulator therapies do reduce the severity of symptoms with, that really antibiotics can't do at all, um, it's obviously there's still a ways to go.
And the general perception that I have from antibiotics in the pharma industry is that there is not much in development. So when a patient then faces resistance, um, there's not much in the pipeline, or does this change?
Yeah, so there is, I mean, I've really become, I can tell you a little bit of the story of my uh, dealing with antibiotic resistant and a particular antibiotic resistant infection that really, again, put me into the advocacy space and really wanting to not just share my story, but be the advocate for bringing awareness to antibiotic resistant infections on a more broader level. Um, but yes, antibiotics are, we view them as our armor, or the way by which we can fight these tiny microbes. However, they are, it's sort of a arms race, because just like, that's like the life cycle, where bacteria also have ways by which to protect and defend themselves against death. And being able to resist antibiotics, which are, the army trying to get them, they build these defenses. And the more that we use antibiotics and the more we're using the same antibiotics, the more that the bacteria register it as a threat and can easily, repel or adapt to no longer be, affected by them. So this is obviously a very basic explanation, but that is what, as I said, is happening for a lot of people that are using antibiotics chronically, like people with cystic fibrosis. And so, but more, even on a global scale, and not, we have to get into this too much, but, there is with the access and the use of high volumes of antibiotics that are being provided without a known source of bacteria that's causing the problem. We're really perpetuating antibiotic resistance on a global scale. And currently, I think with the stalling of true innovation in the development of novel therapeutics against infections, not just traditional antibiotics that we have, but even novel, there's a lack of focus on the novel approaches to treating infections as a whole. There's certainly a lot of it happening, and I can speak to it, from what I know with companies. But as a whole, I think the attitude is, well, we just need new antibiotics, or even not even really understanding the problem of AMR in general. I think the average person, a healthy person, has no idea what antibiotic resistance is, given it is a complex term. It's almost like, it almost seems like quite the opposite, like antibiotic. Anyway, so I think that just general more awareness and understanding within health communities and just the general population can really help to bring about, again, this sort of advocacy and awareness piece that significantly lacks.
Before we move forward, I find this point is really interesting that you mentioned that the general public is not aware what antibiotic resistance means. Can you give an explanation if someone listens into this episode and gets stuck with this point and say, why is there a resistance? I mean,
Sure, yeah. So antibiotic resistance is, it means that the bacteria is resisting the antibiotic, which is the drug. So that means that when a bacteria has antibiotic resistance, that means that these treatments aren't working to eradicate the bacteria or kill it. And so, there's, I think, other terms that may be better used, but it's sort of like when your body has, built up a resistance level uh, or I guess like a level that like no longer. So like, for example, when you take any sort of medication, right, or like pain medications, your body like builds up this tolerance, and then you have to keep taking more to actually affect it. Antibiotic resistance is a little bit different in that it's not that you have to keep adding more antibiotics to treat the infection, treat an infection, but rather that the bacteria just creates this shield, and it's no longer penetrable to get into the bacteria and kill it. And so that is what happens when you have continual, I guess, bombarding of the bacteria. It kills, right? The first onset of the antibiotic will kill many of the bacteria, but some, the strong ones, will remain. And then the ones that remain recognize this antibiotic and they say, oh, well, they know that, okay, well, this is an attack on us. We are creating a shield. We are creating mechanisms that will not allow us, we will no longer be attacked or killed by this. And so then those proliferate. So then those that remain are now stronger. And so then the next onset of antibiotics, when they're being used, now there's even less that are going to be treated, or less that are going to be killed by this antibiotic because more of the bacteria have these defenses. And so that is how that continues, and really leads to antibiotic resistance where there are then no bacteria really that are being treated effectively.
let's dissect this a little bit more because I mean, what you described, let me just be the social media social
Yeah.
media contrarian voice here on the
Okay.
podcast.
Yeah.
Uh, but generally, I mean, what's the problem? Because then a human has antibiotic resistant bacteria. What's the problem? Then I mean, it's just one human. But why is it a problem for the general public, for the general health, for everybody?
Yeah. Good question. Well, I mean, for the human itself, if there is, if one has an antibiotic resistant infection, infections spread. It can spread in the body and can, and in very worst cases, lead to death. Because that can spread into the bloodstream. It can, sepsis. So it's really a whole body shutdown, if worst case scenario. So if we are not able to get treatment for an individual, this is what can occur. On a more broader scale, when we introduce more antibiotics into our into our healthcare, into individuals' bodies, into our society, there is, there are more of these bacteria in hospitals, in our environment, that have been exposed to these antibiotics. And so they now have resistances against many of these antibiotics that we use today. So when you encounter, so when a person, a healthy person can go, maybe they have a routine outpatient surgery in the hospital, but again, these bacteria are ever more so thriving and existing in our world. And so they may just, and as much as we use sterile technique and try to eliminate any source of bacteria in any sort of environment like that, like a surgery, there is that risk. There is a chance. And then if this person gets infected in a wound, with an antibiotic resistant bacteria, who otherwise was normally healthy before, had no problems, they okay, the infection is caught, right? So then maybe the infection starts, and then they start treating it with antibiotics. Well, if this bacteria already has so much resistance, there are very few antibiotics, maybe if any, that are going to effectively kill this infection. And so then you go from having no problem to having an extremely difficult and hard to treat infection and health circumstance. And this can happen to anybody. And so as I said, but just with the higher prevalence of these type of bacteria in our world, in our environments, and in our circles and in around us, potentially the likelihood of contracting one is higher.
Let me be the social media keyboard warrior with a conspiracy theory one more time, please.
Yeah, of course.
But isn't that what the evil pharma industry wants to do anyways? Because at the end of the day, I read this so often since the pandemic, that such a bacteria, such resistant bacteria would be a gold mine for pharma. And many people on social media these days thinks pharma is all about printing money. So having resistant bacteria in the healthcare system would enable pharma to produce one antibiotic after the other, making more money and even more money until the valuation just skyrocket. And yet, when I look into the pipeline for antibiotics, there is not much in development. Why
Mhm.
is that contradiction? I mean, you have these conspiracy theorists who say this would be a great thing for pharma because they can make more money. On the other hand, pharma doesn't do very much in that direction.
Mhm.
Why is this contradiction existing?
So, it really does boil down to economics and the value, monetary value and gain. And so there is this, right, there is this dichotomy that if the more antibiotics that we use, the more antibiotic resistance that will occur. And so there is an understanding, among health professionals as a whole, that it's important to monitor or keep the use of antibiotics, only use antibiotics when absolutely necessary. Don't use antibiotics if you're treating a viral infection, right? Because that's not going to help. So there is this action of antibiotic stewardship, which means that you don't overuse antibiotics when you do not absolutely need it. And so this sort of, to some degree, um, modulates the prescribing of antibiotics. And so and on top of that, antibiotics are easy to make and easy to, they're not complex molecules, and so there isn't as much of a demand in the sense that a lot of people get infections, but there are there are antibiotics that can treat, infections that aren't antibiotic resistance, right? And there's a lot of antibiotics that are available to us that have been around for many years that can treat a basic infection. So that's covered. So there's no need there. It's for these, highly antibiotic resistant bacteria is where we need new therapeutics and new antibiotics and novel approaches developed. But, if you look at it, there's a fewer percentage, there's much fewer, although it's becoming more prevalent, as I said, there is still fewer antibiotic resistant infections which need those treatments for. And so the the combination of, not for not having not enough prescriptions for these novel types of antibiotics that we would need now for these virally resistant infections. So, the thought that there's not enough return on investment with needing, there's not enough prescribing to make up for the money, that would be invested into creating a drug like this. And then selling it can, the returns right now on antibiotics, it's not an expensive drug. They're relatively, because they're inexpensive to make, they're not going to be reimbursed at the same rate. And because they're common, right? Like it's not like treating a rare disease. It's an infection. I already have a lot of people have infections. And so there isn't this incentive
Mm.
to create these new types of antibiotics that are just going to be used in these special circumstances when there is these very resistant infections. And so there isn't companies don't think there is that value there, true value when it comes to a monetary investment. And so this is why I say that the need for novel approaches to treating infections, which means not developing new traditional types of antibiotics that we've seen on the market, but thinking about how we can, harness the immune system to kill the bacteria more readily or better effectively. Thinking about how to break down the interactions between bacteria cells so that they can't work together and fight off the antibiotics that easily. So kind of eliminating those communication channels between them, and that sort of like isolates them and they can't live as well because they're not in the colony. Thinking about how to bacteria also develop what are called biofilms, which is like a protective membrane, and thinking about ways to break down this protective membrane and make them more susceptible. So, thinking about phage therapy is another one, which is the use of, not to go into that too much, but the use of a very specific virus to attack a bacteria and kill it. So these are novel ways that I think are, there is interest and there is an understanding that this is the path forward. And these are ways by which there won't be as much of that type of antibiotic resistance occurring because we're attacking the bacteria in different ways. So there is an awareness to this, but it's still, I think, as a whole, the pharmaceutical industry and investors don't quite understand the difference and how that might be more value long term and actually a greater return on investment.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I think it's a hard problem to solve. I mean, when you throw new antibiotics on already resistant bacteria, it would just put more pressure on them to develop more defenses, and that they become even harder to fight off. And how many new treatments are on the market that try to tackle the problem from a different angle and try to invent something that actually doesn't give bacteria a chance to adapt to it?
Well, I don't know the exact number, to be honest, and I'm only privy to sort of what's happening in the cystic fibrosis space
Mhm.
and amongst sort of that area. But there is a couple of companies that are developing phage therapy, as I said, using this virus type approach. There is one that's using, a couple that are actually using a compound, nitric oxide, to kill bacteria, which is very novel. Again, these using monoclonal antibodies to um, remove the biofilm, the biofilm around the bacteria. So there are novel approaches. It's just that these are, often not coming from, large pharmaceutical companies, rather the biotech where innovation comes from and where money is scarce. And it requires um, a lot of it is chance too, whether your company succeeds or not. It's like, how much buy-in do you have? How much can you convince investors and larger companies and nonprofit organizations that want to invest too? How can you convince them that this is something that could be could be worthwhile?
Yeah, I totally agree. Big Pharma is innovative, but I think the role today for Big Pharma is bringing drugs to patients.
Yeah,
And we have this new ecosystem since the 70s, which is biotech. And their role, in my opinion, is taking promising basic research and translate it into useful products so that pharma can pick it up and later ship it then to the patients. But
right.
before we dive into a case study in cystic fibrosis with Vertex, let's stay a little bit with your story. What I find impressive is you have a condition, you're a patient, and you have a positive attitude developed over the years, but you didn't stop there. You just said, okay, and now I do something for other people. What was this turning point in your life where you said, I'm going to speak up and help other people and not just survive?
So, I mean, I think that it was an evolution over time. But there were a couple of, I think there were two moments, yeah, times I would say, where it really came to the forefront and really solidified my purpose. Um, one of them, one of them a little bit less so, but where I was getting more sick with these infections and I wasn't able to work as much. I was working in a microbiology lab and I was out actually looking at antibiotic resistance in the environment. And so I just, that's where I really started to see, I was like, wow, I have this science understanding and background and I can, bridge these gaps between patients and the healthcare industry as a whole and really help to bring about this awareness and bring this understanding and bring this collaboration. Um, but really it was that as much as I wanted to keep up with my peers and I wanted to be successful in a career and I wanted to work and I wanted to do everything, my health was holding me back and I couldn't do that. I had to spend more time at home. I had to spend more time doing my treatments and um, that's where I started to find and I wasn't able to work full time and that's where I started to f- that frustration of, well, how can I, if I can't do this, then what can I do to make an impact? What skills do I have? And where can I find my space? Because I was originally going to be working doing environmental research, and that wasn't conducive to my health. And so that's where I started to turn to more the advocacy world. That's where I started to get involved with the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation and be a voice on various like research committees as a patient. Um, and then shortly after that, that was maybe in like 2017. And then in 2019, again, when I was already like kind of getting really more involved in this world, sharing my story, empowering other patients too in their disease journeys. Then I got very sick with an infection and I had antibiotic resistance and no antibiotics that I were taking were working. So I was at the time I had 18% lung function. I was on oxygen all the time. I could barely breathe. And I had found out about phage therapy, and it was just through happenstance. Really, sometimes I don't know if things happen for a reason. It's hard to explain, and I knew that my life wasn't sustainable. Like I was not getting any better. I mean, I was looking back, like truly, like on the brink of death. And I um, reached out to these researchers who, were studying phage therapy. And so I was like, this is my situation. I need an alternative to antibiotics. Nothing's working for me. Long story short, we got in communication. I was able to um, try this therapy through expanded access. So it's like an experimental therapy. And ultimately, it did help to treat that acute infection that I was facing at that moment. Obviously, didn't eradicate the bacteria or infection, but it really helped to reduce that infection that I was dealing with, that antibiotics weren't working. And so that experience and the involvement that I had in my own journey and in shaping my health outcome, truly, made me really dive into not just sharing about this experience that I had, but really, bringing that voice to antibiotic resistance, bringing that voice to the need for patients like me, and wanting to be, you know, broaden this even further. So then I started to get asked to speak at conferences and share my story and some of these experience. I did a lot of interviews, and some of this was like published online, and so started to like be a patient advocate and really in a more professional sense. And so that that sort of culminated and continued to then, really shaping, realizing that not just do I have this perspective, right, in antibiotic resistance, and but rather through all of my healthcare encounters and experiences, I understand the journey of the patient, and I understand how there can be better collaboration, and where there are needs that aren't being met, that companies can understand better, and that they can take these insights from patients as a whole to create better products, to create better solutions, and obviously to improve quality of life. And so I started to build a brand, you could say, for myself, and uh, yeah, be an individual who could provide these sort of consulting services or support for companies. And so that has expanded now into working in the clinical trial space, into, helping supporting trial recruitment efforts, into helping biotechs into connect with and understand the patient community that they're trying to work with and trying to get involvement from. As I said before, like working with some nonprofits groups like the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation, and thinking about how they can better support they can better support patients, how they can better support or be involved in, their in the way that they're creating registries and involvement with, investing into companies that are into their portfolio, like what understanding where are their needs from the patient community, that they can then take that and find companies in which that align with the patient needs and develop treatments in that method. So as a whole, again, it's just really starting from that point of getting that treatment, understanding my experience as a patient and what I did to make that happen, with the treatment I received, and then just wanting to expand far, far beyond just AMR, has now led to everything that I'm doing now.
What an amazing story. This must have been a hard time for you. You mentioned 18% lung function.
Yes.
This is
Yeah, it was. Yeah, I mean, I was, and again, not to go too much, but basically, I was unable to, even walking in my house. I was on oxygen because I just couldn't. The air that I was breathing in the air that I was breathing in wasn't providing enough oxygen into my bloodstream to fuel my organs with the oxygen that I needed. So that's why I had to use supplemental oxygen, because the lungs just weren't functioning. So, and I still use oxygen now, but not obviously to that degree at all. Um, but that just gives perspective. So I couldn't even walk around my house without being short of breath.
Man, today you are such a positive force. It's really hard to imagine that this happened to you.
Yeah, well, thank you. I appreciate that.
You mentioned your work with Cystic Fibrosis Foundation. And during the research for our episode, I found an interesting case study which dates back almost 25 years. It's in 2001, Vertex Pharmaceuticals. And the usual way that I know from my work, how to bring new drugs to patients is basically you invent something at universities, research organizations, sometimes big pharma. You go to venture capitalists, they inject money, you bring the drug to clinical phase 2 data, and then you license it to pharma and they bring it to the market at the end of the day. And the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation supported Vertex Pharmaceuticals in their early days with $150 million philanthropic investment in a biotech. Did I read that right? Is it really?
Yeah, it was a huge, I mean, I think it was one of the, yeah, the first like venture philanthropy models that a nonprofit group, kind of thought about doing in partnership with with a biotech or with, with a pharmaceutical company to create a drug. So yeah, it was, I think it served as that um, model for future investments and for other organizations too. And obviously there was a lot of planning involved. There was a lot of, I mean, it wasn't just haphazard, right? But it ultimately, yeah, created what I was mentioning earlier. It created those treatments, those modulator therapy treatments
Mm.
that are treating the underlying cause of CF and really reducing the rate of infection, reducing the rate of the need for antibiotics.
So Vertex had a completely said they were not looking into antibiotics. They really went down the road and said, let's find something for the root cause of the disease and really help patients to improve the life situation. I mean, I find this story really interesting and compelling because so far before we talked, I always thought, yes, I mean, you go to some patient groups and what can they do? 1 million, 2 million maximum, or a few hundred
Mhm.
thousand or 10,000. But this is not enough to bring a drug
Right.
to a meaningful point where Big Pharma
Right.
says, let's pick it up. But 150 million, did you ever find some explanation or some details how they did it? How they could raise so much money?
Well, I think the foundation has, I mean, the foundation started in like, I think the 60s, and there was always a strong network of individuals around the country. Um, some very wealthy individuals too, who had a personal connection to the disease, who wanted to make an impact. And there was a really, strategic approach in building, again, these like these local community organizations around the country that can then kind of come together in a more overarching and broader organization. And so each of these, local chapters, what they call them, and communities, were really grounded in the community and in bringing support from a local basis and um, I think that's what's really brought and helped to, bring about such large amounts of fundraising from individuals within communities that are personally affected by the disease. And so that then culminated into these, localized communities that can then really bring resources and investment together as a whole and really build this strong network. So not only does it include, the fundraising, the money side, and really delving or getting strong roots into the community, but also building a strong network of hospital systems and providers who are specialists in the condition and who are strongly linked under the umbrella of the foundation as well. So there's this research matrix as well, where it's, you know, uh, there's a generalized basis of care. Like there is protocols for all care centers to meet a certain level of expectation. There is effective communication between the care centers and sharing information and research. And so this is really what has helped to, um, solidify the effective treatments, and then again to able to culminate that money to put into something, like Aurora and Vertex, and what that, what is that's now become. But I think with that foundation early on, as I said, like in the 60s, and laying the groundwork for that connectedness, and local chapters and fundraising really helped to support that.
But I mean, the underlying message for me in this story is that it really helps patients at the end of the day when they learn to speak up and work on and start working on solutions. Because I think also the foundation in the 60s, I mean, it started with people, with one patient after the other, talking to each other, basically
Mhm.
coming together and thinking about how can we change that instead of just sitting in the next bar, getting drunk and say, okay, life sucks.
Yeah. Fortunately, it started from, yeah, groups of people who were really motivated to make a difference. And I think that's advocate, right? Going back to what is advocacy? That's what advocacy is. It's making a change in your situation and on behalf of others.
And don't wait until others do it.
To do it first.
Start first.
Right.
Make the first start.
Right.
Um, when you look at the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation model and Vertex, what are the three most important moves where say when other patient groups do this, they will 10x the results?
Well, definitely not an expert, but I think that instead, so what the CF Foundation did was sort of move away from just the grant model where they were just giving money, $1 million, 500,000, whatever, to companies or researchers, but rather doing more like equity style investment or royalties, right? Which is what the foundation did, to really embed into that partnership with companies and really be true partners and sit at the table and say, like, this is the needs of our community. This is where these gaps exist. This is why, this is the data, and this is the infrastructure and the data that we already have existing, right? That means that the CF Foundation has a very robust registry and keeps track and data of all of patients in the country that have CF and their health outcomes. And so this allows that security for companies too, to say, okay, well, this could be a good partnership if there is already this disease awareness and understanding, and we have this partnership. We can really, there's a much stronger likelihood of success. That aligned along too with, and again, obviously it's the CF Foundation again has had so much monetary resources that many small foundations, obviously it takes a lot to get to this level. But in addition to that network of providers too, and hospital systems, that also provides that security for or support when it comes to the research actually making it into the patient population. Once basic research is done, when there's actually that jump into getting getting the trial underway and having that strong network of, okay, we can easily recruit patients for this trial. We know these physicians, it can help to um, the more of that security that things don't fall apart when it comes to actually getting the clinical trial underway. And you have that enrollment assurance, and you have that kind of eyes on it from the physician perspective, from the advocacy organization perspective too, that this is going to be addressing, and it's going to be implemented in a way that's going to support patients the best. And so I would say that those are the ways by which the foundation has certainly stood out in the way that they have been able to partner, and specifically in this example too.
There's a lot of powerful information in what you said. I think the first part that's important to understand, I mean, cystic fibrosis is still a rare disease, isn't it?
It is, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So commercially, from when I just look at it from a commercial standpoint, Excel sheets, it would not be interesting for anybody to do something in that. Just put it bluntly.
Yeah.
And yet, you said that the foundation is very powerful, has accumulated a lot of money, made some smart deals over 6 decades. Do I get it right?
Mhm.
Over 6 decades. So, but they started at some point. And I think the most important point that you mentioned, in my opinion, is that the foundation understands the needs of the patients and collects a lot of data around it, which is a key point in drug development. And very often it's, I would say, completely underrated by drug
Mhm.
developers, how important how important it is to connect the patient's data, what's going on with these people and in the healthcare system to drug developers. And this is, I think, also a promising suggestion for other patient foundations. Just start collecting data, collecting patients, bring people together, and you become an asset yourself.
Right. Exactly. And I think a lot of, even a lot of small nonprofit groups are now understanding that value, understanding the value of tracking that data and keeping that, right? Because, there's a lot of value in that. And companies sometimes pay a lot of money to access that kind of data from other sources.
Mm.
So if a foundation can be a source of that data and, have strong monitoring and sort of oversight, and connection to the community, it's extremely powerful.
Yeah, I
And
totally.
go ahead.
No, no, go ahead. I
No, I was
totally
just
agree to that.
the last moment. Yeah, it can really lead to that insight into where, how can a treatment very specifically address the need, and also how can the trial and even the way that the treatment is going to be studied and tested, how that can be most effectively done.
Yeah, I totally agree to that. I think the question that I have or pops up in my mind is how can we bring the early stage researchers or even the basic researchers faster in contact with these patients groups? Because usually what I have seen in the industry is that the first time people start thinking about patients is when they start talking with the FDA. And then very often it's just academic, or you just go Google search and download some information that you find, and that's it, but not real world data. And coming from a development, from a corporate standpoint, I think it would be very interesting to make this connection much faster and much earlier. What are the solutions on the market that you saw that work?
You mean as far as like, yeah, how to get sort of the nonprofits and the pharma working together
Mm,
earlier?
mm, mm.
It is a challenge. I think industry is understanding there is that need. They're understanding the value of bringing in these perspectives early on and having that strong collaboration. I think, again, yeah, it doesn't happen early enough. I think there needs to be those conversations before any drug is even really found or researched further, beyond the bench. Like there has to be, to tailor and to target what it is exactly that they're searching for and why. Then when it comes to even the development of the trial early on and those early conversations with the FDA, it's important for the patient group to be involved and to have involvement with those early conversations, because I think, without going too much down this track, but regulatory is, they kind of have their lane. They're kind of used to, okay, what kind of data, what kind of research has come out of this particular disease area before? And that's what they're used to expecting, and that's what they're used to seeing. But as we move forward with, in considering patient experiences more in the trial experience and journey, and there is this understanding that, well, how can we innovate on even, the development of clinical endpoints that can be most meaningful to patients? How can we think about, well, what is what data is actually being captured in this trial that can then lead to potentially data that is going to be clinically meaningful to the not just to verify or to add clinical evidence for the trial itself, but then that can actually support patients as far as actualizing their improved quality of life on a treatment. And so I think that this has to happen early on. It can't be like once the protocol is already established and then they bring on the patient groups. No, it has to be in development together. So that is something that like the foundation does have, is what's called a therapeutic development network. And so they're working with all the biotechs and companies that they are monetarily supporting in their portfolio. um, there is some involvement in, developing the clinical trial and developing what it is exactly that looks like, the protocol looks like together. So that, there isn't, I think, maybe a lot of partnership like that, but it is increasing. And I think that all sides are seeing the value.
Yeah, this is interesting. So this foundation is not just a group of people working together for a cause and helping patients to talk to each other and to ease their burden, but really collecting the real needs of patients, understanding also the real needs of the healthcare system with the patients, um, having clinics lined up that actually specialize on this condition and investing themselves in new treatments, in new technology, and bringing together also research and development resources. It sounds like it has become an ecosystem by itself.
And that's, I think that, yeah, that's the goal. I think if nonprofit organizations are able to acquire, this kind of knowledge base and professionals and individuals who can really support all of these different areas, that's when you can really, go to a company and say, hey, this is why we are a valued partner. This is why we can bring success to not just, you as a company and the money you hope to gain, but also to our disease population.
Mhm. Yeah, it's absolutely true. And I think it's a good role model that other foundations should study that don't have such an established development stage yet and can learn a lot. What's the next step? How can they move forward? How can they help their groups, their people better? Um, there was one question that sparked in my mind while you were speaking. Did you ever have a chance to observe the interaction of the foundation when they invest in a company with venture capitalists?
Um, I've never personally been a part of any of the conversations, but I think, I do have some acquaintances and individuals that I know who are actually, they are patients themselves, and they're working as part of venture capital in evaluating, with a feasibility or whether the value of investing into a company or not. And I think something they really look at is how integrated is this company, the pharma, the biotech, how connected and integrated are they with understanding and being a part of the patient community or the nonprofit space? Because I think that can gives insight into potentially the success that they're going to have in the future. Um, I think I think they understand that, again, this partnership there. So they know that there's an unmet there's this unmet need that under patients and patient communities, patients understand. And so when they're evaluating and seeing that there is this, basic and strong foundation of connection between pharma and the patient groups or biotechs, I think it's de-risking for them. It's they're realizing that there is more of that assurance and for success, and then more of a likelihood that there is value going to be gained long term from that partnership and from the treatment or the product that evolves.
I think I totally agree with what you say. I think the contradiction between a foundation, when contradiction is probably not the right word, or dichotomy between foundations and VC world is that foundations have the core role to improve the lives of their patients or support their patients. So basically, when they have money, they would invest in everything they perceive as valuable to their patients, regardless of profitability at the end of the day. So this is not the
Mhm.
core motivation. But I think there is some motivation to make some money, of course, to have enough firepower to fuel the next generation of treatments. But it's
Mhm.
not the core motivation. While VCs are driven by their investors,
Right.
to deliver returns at the end of the day, venture capital always boils down to you need to return capital to their investors at scale.
Mhm.
So I think the point that you mentioned is very compelling that foundations basically are a de-risking entity that can help take the first risk, move ideas forward to a point where VCs then can select promising candidates that match their success criteria. So there can be like it's like a catalog at the end of the day where VCs can say, okay, we can help with that because sorry, but we need to be profitable. And with the other treatments, we can't help. So this is basically a very selective collaboration potential between VCs and foundations.
Yeah. And I think it can help to just broaden VC's perspective too. I think
Mm.
there is nuance to, yeah, you can see like from on paper, right? Okay, this has the potential to have this kind of return. But I think there is that nuance that this, potential collaboration or just, perspective from nonprofit groups can provide is that there is that insight into, okay, well, maybe for example, we know that there are modulator therapies on the market for CF already, right? There may not be as great of a need in that space, but the need for developing gene therapies obviously is monumental. And also the need for, more nuanced here too, in when the patient group can relay that, for example, in CF, patients that have modulator therapies, like what I am using myself, there is still this level of underlying disease that exists. So my lung function is still very limited. I live a better quality of life than I have in the past, but it's could certainly still be a lot better. And all of that is because of this disease the disease that cannot be reversed in my lungs. So even if I were to get a gene therapy and eliminate the infection in my lungs, make the cells work properly, the lung tissue is severely damaged. So there are many patients whom, don't have this underlying disease, but there is a population that does. And so, would a gene therapy help me that much? I mean, to a degree, absolutely. But what other ways can there be thinking about how to improve quality of life for individuals in my circumstance that have CF? Well, thinking outside the box, stem cell therapy, rejuvenating lung tissue. How can we get, with the existing lungs that I have, and then in combination with gene therapy, stem cell therapy can rejuvenate the lung and then basically live a new life. So that's like, and, so not saying that VCs and necessarily the CF space don't understand this, but it provides just that additional perspective and understanding of the disease, of how it manifests, of patients' experiences long term, that can then shape the way that they might think about investing in the future.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think it was Kostler Ventures. I read it in some books, Venture Mindset and The Power Law by Sebastian Mallaby. It's attributed to Kostler that he said, if there is a 1% chance of something being a success in when the idea is really new and nobody tackles it, it's an investment he would take. But to understand that what's this 1% chance and what's a problem that nobody tackles yet needs exactly that kind of insight and data that you mentioned in the last couple of minutes. It needs a group of people who understand the disease, who live with the disease, and can then really boil down and say, look, this is solved. Everything
Mhm.
you do there is not a problem anymore, but this particular part of the patient experience has not been solved yet. And when you find something that solves this, you have everybody in this disease space who becomes a buyer immediately. And this is a level of detail we see naturally they can't do it. They need to look at a lot of opportunities at the same time.
Right. Yeah.
So patient groups at the end of the day are really powerful, and it changed completely my perspective, because I always thought, okay, it's more like a self-help group, but it goes far beyond what's possible. I mean, it's not only a self-help group, you can do so much more.
I agree. And I think that, there is obviously this shift occurring, and there is this awareness and understanding from from investors. But I think it's more individuals like you and more conversations like this that can really like open the doorway, and kind of bring about this type of change.
So when you organize patients at the end of the day, you become an integral part of the value creating story, the value story for a VC, with your insight when it's really structured well.
Hmm. Hmm.
And artificial intelligence, in my opinion, can't replace it, because the data must be structured first.
Yeah.
Because I mean, today it's really tempting to say, okay, we have now LLMs, so you find everything online. But all this experience that you live through, and your colleagues live through, and the other patients live through, not much of that is pre-structured to
Right.
in LLMs yet.
Right. Right. No, and I mean, obviously, yeah, AI, Gen AI is just the future of where we're going, and truly the incredible advances that it's creating and will be creating in our future. But yeah, I think that's it. It's like we're currently, I think there is still this gap in accessing that understanding truly from, just that the data cannot capture. And not to go on another tangent, but just briefly to add to that point, and not that it necessarily relates to VCs at all in this context, but I, you know, given I've been on these modulator therapies, right, a number of years, my lung function, the numerical value of my lung function has only improved 5% in total. So I was at like 25% before. Now I'm at like close to 30. So in the whole span of all these years, in the 6 years that I've been on these therapies, you've only improved 5%. Now, you might not like from a, just for looking at it on paper, that's not a considerable quality of life change. I mean, it's quite minimal, you could say. But in that time, none of this is documented in my health record. The fact that I was moved by myself to a different state. The fact that I travel often and by myself, for meetings, for work, for fun, for leisure. The fact that I'm able to keep a social calendar active and do things that for the most part, things that I want to do. The fact that I haven't had to use, well, this might be documented, but the fact that antibiotic use, I've not had to use any intravenous antibiotics, though I still use antibiotics in other forms. That the difference in having to be stuck to either in a hospital or just stuck with an IV pole for 3 weeks during, the summer months, and the inconvenience and the havoc that can cause in my life, and the difference between that and not having to do that is huge. And so that, although, it seems that maybe my quality of life hasn't changed much, these are things that aren't captured in the patient experience, and that really affect how, the type of life that I can live long term.
And thank you for bringing it up, because this is at the end of the day what generates value. This is your experience, your perception of the change that a drug brings to your life is what creates value at the end of the day. Not a percentage, not a number in an Excel sheet, but your experience when you say, okay, it's just 5%, and it looks really small, but the change in your life is huge, because you get so much quality back. there is the value that's also valuable for the VCs at the end of the day, because you report that back then to your healthcare system. You motivate your doctors, your physicians, your healthcare team to use more of the drug. And they go back then to the healthcare system and say, look, I mean, so many patients feedback that this is really helpful. We need more of this. And then they motivate Big Pharma to produce more of the drug. And this motivates then at the end of the day, more researchers to put in more research and gets more VCs going. So
Right.
it's really your experience. And my question to you is, how can we, I mean, do we have really a sufficient connection between patients groups, investors, pharma industry, researchers across the ecosystem, or is there anything that can be improved? What's the most important thing to improve in your opinion?
Oh man, that's a tough question. Because all of those there can be improvement between
Mhm.
every one of those stakeholders. Um, I think currently and increasingly there is stronger and stronger collaboration between patients and biotech and pharma. That is evidenced, that is happening, that is great. I think there is still, that lacking obviously between VC and patients. There is a lot of that missing links and understanding that, as we've just elaborated on here. Regulatory, there's another gap there. I think that bringing patients to the table, not just as a whole, not just regulatory thinking about, okay, pharma needs to, create more patient-centric trials, but really when it comes to actually the development of these trials and the way that they're going to be structured, bringing patients into those early conversations, there's still a huge need there. And I think the way that as far as the way that it can occur, the way that these pieces and parts can come together, obviously it varies depending on the relational situation and who's communicating with who. Um, but I think patients have a lot of power. I think that sometimes sometimes I myself, given the reach that I have and the involvement that I have with these various different stakeholders and organizations, I often don't feel like I have power or say or really know how to access or be involved. But I think the power of the internet and sharing these voices and sharing these stories and how, just the momentum we can create as not one individual, but as a whole population, as a rare disease community, as a cystic fibrosis community, as a patient community, the more that we can make these different stakeholders or inspire, change the perspectives of these different stakeholders, the more that we can educate ourselves as patients to learn and understand the nuance of, what are the perspectives of these different stakeholders? What are their goals and what are our goals? And how can we align those goals so that we're working toward a mutual goal? And I think, it's again, this is very much theoretical. But it's on an individual basis, I think just from all this, from every stakeholder's perspective, more openness to understanding what is going to not just that is going to be a mutual benefit, what is going to help your organization or your company, and then what is going to help the lives of people living with diseases to improve their quality of life. So what's their goal? What's my goal? And what can we do together to make that happen better? And I think if everybody adopts that mindset, that's where we're going to see these true forms of collaboration early and often, and really see this evolution in the healthcare structure and industry as a whole that we see today.
Yeah, yeah, very well said. I think there is a lot of movement in the industry. I had Fabrizio Conicella from, I hope I speak the name of the company right, because I've started in the wrong way and got 1 week ago the information that I should spell it differently. It's Chiesi.
Okay.
It's an Italian pharma company, and he mentioned that his initiative within the pharma company, it's an Italian company,
Mhm.
is to focus on real patient problems. So there is really something going on. I'm surprised that it should also be bread and butter for venture capitalists. And my question to you is, when a VC or a pharma company or a research organization listens to the episode, what's your contribution to the space as a consultant? What can you bring to them?
I believe that I can bring a realistic perspective on not just, obviously sharing what is the needs of the community, where are their gaps, and where are there ways in which they can be better supported, but also in understanding what are the goals and limitations of these other stakeholders as well. What ultimately do they want to achieve, and how can involvement with patients create a better ecosystem for that to occur? So, so as far as the work I'm doing is is bringing a holistic patient perspective to organizations. And, it's not just what the most common thing that patients want or say, or, but it's really capturing understanding and information from people that have vastly different lived experiences, those that, may be healthier, that have access to treatments readily, those that, really are struggling to access the basics. What are their needs? How can we try to bridge all of that and find solutions that work best for everybody? And mm, making sure that companies can understand this in a way that can actually support what they want to achieve as well. And working within the the scope of what is realistic as well, given, regulatory policy and other, a lot of other monetary, a lot of other factors that go into that kind of decision and in that evaluation of what can actually be done to improve patient experiences, improve patient lives, and ultimately, drive innovation by bringing uh, you know, getting the monetary payoff for companies, for investors, for other stakeholders.
Yeah, great mission. At the end of the day, it's also important that we make money with it to reinvest in the next generation and not forget about it. It's not all about philanthropy, because if there is
Right.
no money, then at one point in time we can stop development. And this is, I think, also something that I hope the Trump administration sees in a couple of weeks, months, or days, that we need a certain price level to reinvest in the development of new drugs. And this brings me to another important point before we dive into why rare diseases matter. But what you said is that very often, especially in the early stages of development, there is this missing link to patients. And I had a conversation last week with a founding team, new compound, new target, promising in the lab. And when I said, when I asked them, okay, what about the market? What about the patients? They say, yeah, we do that in the clinical trials. We do that later. What's your
Mm.
message to them? Why does it make sense for such a group to start talking with patient groups early?
I'd say, well, first, it's a mistake. That's a huge mistake because there's many, so many factors. I mean, when it comes to the structure of, before you get into the clinic, the structure of the design of the trial. Is a patient going to want to participate in this? Is this patient going to see value in this therapy? How much value? Is it something that is going to be worthwhile for them? Um, is, so that's obviously at the end, once if it even comes to, if it comes to, market. But even in the duration of the trial, like, is it feasible? Do people think that the trade-off or the trade-off or the value that they might gain from being a participant is going to then support recruitment efforts? And it's extremely hard to recruit patients in trials nowadays. There's so many factors into why a patient might not participate, from, competition on the market, other trials, other treatments, and, a general improvement of quality of life versus maybe how they lived before. Their familial, their society, their kind of existing circumstances. And so when a company might not understand the true value that could or could not be gained by a patient population, they may be really missing the mark and not understanding, and very well could lead to the failure of that product or that treatment and not even get to a point of success.
Yeah, that's a great point. That's a great point. Let's shift gears a little bit. I read in your bio that you also work with the WHO.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. What are you doing with them?
So that's tied back to the advocacy work that I'm doing in antibiotic resistance. So I'm part of an AMR task force that is comprised of individuals with who have been touched or support um, antibiotic resistant uh, awareness in their local communities all around the world. And we are, partnering to really create broader awareness for the problem of AMR as a global problem. How we can how policymakers and local governments can be incentivized and just see the need for better cross collaboration and partnership, and then how there can be more developed strategic like action plans and better stakeholder integration and involvement to address the problem of antibiotic resistance, from a funding perspective, from a pharmaceutical perspective, from a public-private partnership perspective as well. So we are sort of working from on a global scale to try to bring more broader awareness and humanize the problem of antibiotic resistance. So that's I have another, I think, year on the committee.
That's great. That's great. What's your biggest learning from that experience?
Um, hmm, I'm not trying to be pessimistic, but it's
Sorry for the question.
no, no, no. Meaning, I'm not trying to be pessimistic in my answer, but that it's it is very challenging um, to generate change and for example, I was part of the UN high level meeting on AMR in September of last year, and I was provided the opening remarks and the opening speech about my experience, and it was uh, truly impactful for those attended, and there's a lot of um, I think kind of plans made for, local governments for more policy change and broader, regional and just kind of a focus on how we can address AMR in these various different perspectives and with these stakeholders. But change happens very slowly, and I think that even despite some of these very like public meetings and large scale gatherings of individuals, it's like it still takes lots and lots of individual champions to do that in their local places, in their, it's one thing to just have these meetings and have these overarching messagings and goals, but really then when we taking that into action into our own lives and into our own spaces as we move forward and as we're trying and working with other groups and stakeholders, that's where sometimes it can really, stagnate. So I think, again, that was kind of a generalized answer, but change is not easy.
Yeah, I believe that. I believe that. If you could wave a magic wand and change the biggest blocking stone in the system, what would that be?
The system, the biggest blocking stone in the system as far as innovation for healthcare or,
Mhm.
yeah. Um, hmm, that's a tough question. Because there's I mean, there's so many things, but I would say I think it's generally speaking people's fear of the unknown and a fear of risk.
Mm.
I think I think the more that we as a whole, as individuals, think about, yeah, whether take act out of confidence and out of taking a calculated risk, more so than staying reticent or staying in a mindset of fear where, okay, if I if we're not evolving or trying these different tactics when it comes to, trial design, or if we're not reaching out to patients, if we just stay doing what we're doing, nothing really changes and nothing really improves. If investors don't really think, okay, you know what, we've gathered information from this, patient community, we're going to take this risk. The more that we can take calculated risks and act not out of fear, the more evolvement, the more change that occurs in a positive way.
I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more. Especially here in Europe, I think I will make a clip out of your message and post it 24/7 on LinkedIn. This is very important. Let's not act out of fear and resist to change, but let's drive change and take calculated risks. Some will work, some won't work, but it's worth taking the risk.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think that's my life motto.
Mm.
Yeah.
And it works well. When we go back to WHO, you said it's really difficult to bring change to the system. What role do you see with social media? Is this a tool that patient groups or patients can use to bring more attention to their cause, or is it just noise?
No, I think social media is a fantastic way by which to create momentum and change. I mean, I think we see from, obvious, just from the surgence of all these TikTok influencers and,
Mm.
mega sensations that have arisen from simply sharing their ordinary life on social media have risen to fame. And why? It's because people in general are interested in other people. People are interested in knowing the feelings and the actions and what really the emotions that drive other people. And so the more that we can tap into, the more that we can use social media and tap into what, advocating for a cause or sharing our journeys and what makes our lives difficult and how our experiences have shaped us. That's what people find interesting. And you can obviously turn that into, educational and, saying, sharing the realities, sharing the science, sharing the, all of these factors. And, I think that, but that's ultimately what makes people listen first is touching that human to human relationship and why, why our lives have impacted away, and then how they might be able to relate to our experience. So finding those, using social media to find those ways by which we can relate to one another is what inspires, is what changes, is what motivates people to think about things in a different way, to do things in a different way, and to, take that into into their own lives and maybe be this conduit to, you know, advocating or just sharing the message beyond.
Did I get it right with your scientific background? You advocate on social media to share experience, emotions, and the life of patients so that they should actively use social media, like TikTok, for example, to demonstrate what makes their life difficult.
Yes, yeah, I think that so I I'm not a TikTok or social media influencer by any means. It is not the primary way by which I have done a lot of my advocacy.
Mm.
That being said, though, I think it is. a great channel and method by which to do that. And to, again, not just share a message of, share a message of vulnerability and of the reality and the truth and what needs changing and what is difficult and where, we can allocate resources into. But also to spin it as a way to motivate other people to do the same in their own
Mm.
lives. I think that's the key.
Yeah, I find it
Yeah,
particularly.
good,
So
good.
sorry to interrupt you.
No, no, no. I was just saying I, haven't done it too much on the social media platforms, but um, yeah, I think it's a great way to do it.
No, I totally agree. I think it's also a great way to do it. I mean, it's just I'm a man, obviously, and vulnerability is not one of my strengths. So I would rather say share your marathon experience and your great times. But while you were speaking, I think vulnerability in terms of being a patient makes absolute sense because when I think how politicians, regulators, VCs, decision makers use social media these days is a simple way when they see potential in a field or a problem or in search of a problem that they can solve, they go to Google search and they go to LLMs.
Mhm,
And today, when I use Google search, Alphabet has connected Gemini with Google
mhm,
search. And what you get back are basically videos, TikToks,
mhm.
short videos on YouTube. And when you said when a patient shared their experience, their problem with their rare disease on TikTok, they have a good chance of landing that content into the search results of a decision maker when they do
Oh,
their research. So it's
wow.
really a great tool.
I didn't even know that. I didn't know that integration now is even like showing these kind of videos on social media. I mean, that's the power of of AI and the integration that we're seeing, with the internet and just kind of our world as a whole. So, yeah, I think that's really powerful. Well, thanks for sharing that, and I think that that's exactly right. It's even though it might not seem like we're just sharing our story, sharing our voice. At some point, it might reach the person that needs to hear it.
Yeah, when I think back, let's say 15 years, I was working in a biotech company and I was responsible for funding, fundraising, business case modeling and stuff like that. And what you had at the end of the day was reports, expensive
Mhm,
reports,
mhm.
Excel sheets, and conversations with physicians. No information about the patients at the end of the day. And when I think now in 2025, when patients start sharing their stories, every research would immediately lead to their experience. So this is really a connection that we didn't have in the last 10, 15 years. And now it's possible with the tools we have now and also with the change in the industry. This is really a good point. We should emphasize that more, I think.
Also, I think uh, between even just like sharing messaging between patient that have, between patients themselves and the communities, and obviously across stakeholders,
Mm.
it's more valuable. But just that connectedness as a whole that it's created um, is obviously a great advantage. Despite, I think, some of the maybe you lose a little bit of that like the human connection in a to a degree. The screens and just like the online world kind of create a little bit of that siloed spaces a little bit, but anyway, I think the benefit outweighs.
Yeah, it's always a question how we use the tools. I totally agree to that. There is always risk and danger. But on the other side, as you said before, we should look on the positive side. I'm curious. If you have some minutes, I have a few questions. We are
Yeah.
closer to 2 hours. But storytelling is really interesting point, and TikTok and YouTube, and you have a lot of experience with policymakers working with the WHO and also working with the industry. You were speak at Bio International, work with patients groups. When I think about storytelling, impactful storytelling to get a message across to policymakers, what's your advice to patients? How should they package their experience so that the policymaker gets moving?
That's a good question. I don't have extensive experience doing advocacy on the Hill or, in legislative advocacy. But I would say that you have to you have to touch they have to be able to relate to your story and your message in some way. It has to touch them on a personal level. And that is what motivates change. Is when people are truly touched at a deep and to some degree at a deep level that they can relate to, that they emote for. That is what then says, okay, this is something that I support. This is a cause that is meaningful to me. This is something that needs to change. Now, how exactly to do that? I think it's by maybe it's exactly that. Maybe it's relating like, hey, this happened to me, right? I have antibiotic resistance, and this is the infection that I've treated, but this could happen to you. This may have happened to you in your family or somebody that you know. And sort of break it down in a way that it's easily understandable, easily digestible, and easily relatable. And I think that's how you can really get any people get buy-in.
Mhm.
I mean, this spans beyond just talking to, a policymaker as a patient, but it goes into how you convince anybody to buy a product, how any brand creates that interest or awareness. It's how is what we're creating a benefit to you, or how can you um, empathize or think that we have value in what we're creating because it touches you personally. So I think that's just a general, broader message, but that's what I'd say.
Yeah, I totally agree. Storytelling is one of the most underrated skills. And now with social media, everybody should learn how to tell a good story to motivate another person, to not ignore a cause, but also see the value for themselves.
Right.
When we look into the future in 10 years and you could design the future for your work, how would the endpoint look like in 10 years? How would the healthcare system, patient advocacy look like?
Mm. Well, in 10 years, realistically, I know things move slowly, but so I think we'll see some changes.
Mm,
I've been in this space now, I guess, like the last 7, 8 years. Um, no, maybe more than that, but really delving into understanding different stakeholders and being a voice in this space. And have I seen change? Yeah, tremendous, absolutely. But I guess if I could say what I would like to see in 10 more years is that it's that each stakeholder, that's biotech, pharma, like they and patients, there's an automatic understanding that we all work together early at the start. So that means there is going to be that automatic outreach to patients and patient groups, and that collaboration occurring early on, no matter what. There is that those conversations happening with regulatory bodies early on, and everybody has a seat at the table. Um, there is, increasingly and readily VCs, investors are gaining that, building those relationships with the patients. They're having those conversations every single time that an investment is made or evaluated. There is better connectedness between, in the clinical trial landscape between hospitals, patients, doctors. There is more streamlining of care. There's better handoffs. There's not these spaces of unknown where a patient doesn't know how, how they transition off of a clinical trial back to the care with their doctor. They don't know what needs to happen. So there's less of these unknowns, less of these silos, less of everybody working on their own little area and their own space, and instead reaching out to all of the different stakeholders getting the perspectives, working together so that we don't leave these gaps. We don't leave these areas of unknown where, a drug can, you know, start clinical trials and then fail because they didn't understand the patient population and what is actually needed, or whether they would actually be successful in recruiting for a trial or not. And, there aren't patients that are left, you know, kind of in places where they don't know who to turn to, don't have trust in their doctors or don't understand how they might be a patient advocate and just support, or, a collaborative person between industry and patient advocacy organizations. And um, so I think that's just what I would like to see more, better connectedness and more communication amongst all stakeholders.
You mentioned that the system works slow.
Mm,
Let's imagine you can enforce three things in drug development to make the system work really fast.
mm.
Like in the pandemic back then, because the system was working fast back then. What three changes would you make in the system that it moves at light speed?
Um, and irrelevant of, I guess, cost and resources and monetary.
That doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. You can change everything.
Um, sorry, three things. One is just a general like care for other people, care for other people's perspective, care for other people's um, view, help them understand your perspective, help understand theirs. And that just kind of broadly speaks to that collaboration and that unity. Okay, what does one person want out of an interaction? What does a biotech want out of a collaboration with a patient organization? What does a VC want out of the evaluation of the return or of companies that they're going to invest into? What does a patient want when it comes to their day-to-day lives? So understanding others' perspectives and considering that. So having consideration and empathy in everything that you're doing. Um, I think another thing is, and maybe a more tangible type of uh, or kind of opinion is, uh, I think just acting, not out of, uh, well, we said this, not acting out of fear or emotion, but coming from a place of reality. And, the reality that it's possible that we might not be able to help, every clinical trial might not be able to include every single patient in that trial that is in need. We might not be able to, you know, have diverse recruitment efforts as much as we would like, or to try, based on the limitations that a company has with their resources, but as much as possible, to optimize as much as possible, but operate within that frame of this is really, we are doing the most that we can with the realistic perspective of this is what our limitations are. But really to push that envelope and try, don't act out of fear. Try, take the calculated risk, but also be in that space of we are doing the best that we can, truly. And we're collaborating as much as we can. We're thinking about other stakeholders' perspectives. We're evaluating others' perspectives and incorporating that into the development that we're doing, that we're working on. And yeah, and that's how we move forward.
Great points. Great points. One almost final question. What's your craziest idea?
Oh my gosh. Um, Craziest idea? I really don't have too many crazy ideas. I'm pretty I do operate very,
I was hoping.
I do operate very much within the realm of reality and possibility, unfortunately,
Mm,
as I just described all of the
yeah.
realistic perspectives I have. But craziest idea is that one day I hope we don't, patients, people with conditions don't suffer at all, or at least to the degree at which they do today. And that we can find treatments effectively, find cures for conditions that people die from today, every single day. And let that not be, the obviously life causes suffering and we all die from something. But the more that we can improve people's lives and their health, the better that we can become and the more we can contribute to humanity. So that's my hope. Treat and cure conditions.
I love this crazy idea. Ella, before we come to the end, where can people follow your work best and reach out to you?
Yeah. So obviously LinkedIn is a great method for that. I'm very active on LinkedIn and post a lot of my work and collaborations there. I have a website, which is ellabalasa.com. So you can reach out to me through that as well. And I have a contact page. And I have some social media on Instagram. You can find me through Ella Balasa and then also email, which is balasaconsulting.com. Um, at balasaconsulting@gmail.com. So yeah, those are the ways by which. And I'm open to, very interested in hearing from anybody who has something either just to share with me or a question or any brainstorming idea, whatever it is, I'm very open and eager.
And finally, what gives you hope right now?
Um, I think honestly, what gives me hope right now is living. I think it's at a most basic level. Um, I think that when we can work towards, I have a lot of hope for the future. I see the positive. And the longer I can be on this earth to contribute to that positivity for others and for myself, the more meaning that I derive. And so, yeah, my hope is just what's giving me hope is a hope for a future where I can do all those things.
Ella, thank you very much for this fantastic conversation. I loved every minute of it, especially you radiate such a positive energy and your passion for your work shines through and helping people, helping patients. And I'm pretty sure you make a huge contribution to the industry to improve the lives of many patients. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Christian. I really appreciate this opportunity.
And finally, have a great 4th of July weekend tomorrow and enjoy the celebration.
Thank you.